traditional economics Traditional economists seem strangely averse to studying individual humans. It seems to be a rule with them that everything has to start with statistics. So they give you very precise numbers with variation in wealth and income, then follow it with most naive speculation about the underlying causes. But while there are a lot of people who get rich through rent seeking of various forms, and a lot of people who get rich by playing zero sum games, there are also a lot of significant number who get rich by creating wealth. And creating wealth as a source of economic inequality is different from taking it not just morally but also practically, in the sense that it is harder to eradicate. The reason is that the variation in productivity is accelerating. The rate at which individuals can create wealth depends on the technology available to them, and that grows exponentially. The one reason, the other reason creating wealth is such a tenacious source of inequality is that it can expand to accommodate a lot of people. I'm all for shutting down the crooked ways to get rich, but that won't eliminate the great variations in wealth, because as long as you leave open the option of getting rich by creating wealth, people who want to get rich will do that instead. Most people who get rich tend to be fairly driven. Whatever their flaws, laziness is usually not one of them. Suppose new policies make it hard for them to make a fortune in finance. Does it seem plausible that the people who currently go into finance to make their fortunes will continue to do so, but be content to work for an ordinary salaries? The reason they go into finance is not because they love finance, but because they want to get rich. If the only way to get rich is to start startups, they'll start startups. They'll do well at it too. Because determination is the main factor in the success of a startup. And while it would be probably a good thing for the world if people who want to get rich switched from playing zero sum games to creating wealth, that would not only eliminate great variations in wealth but might even exacerbate them. In a zero sum game, there is at least a limit to the upside. Plus, a lot of new startups who would create new technology that further accelerated variation in productivity. Variation in productivity is far from the only source of economic inequality, but it is the irreducible core of it. In the sense that you'll have that left when you eliminate all other sources, and if you do, the core will be big, because it will have expanded to include efforts of all the refugees. Plus, it will have a large bomb penumbra around it. Anyone who could get rich by creating wealth on their own account will have to be paid enough to prevent them from doing it. Obviously, you can't prevent great variations in wealth without preventing people from getting rich, and you can't do that without preventing them from starting startups. So let's be clear about that. Eliminating great variations in wealth would mean eliminating startups, and that doesn't mean a wise move, especially since it would only mean you eliminated startups in your own country. Ambitious people are already move halfway around the world to further their careers, and startups can only operate from anywhere nowadays. So if you made it impossible to get rich by creating wealth in your country, people who wanted to do that would just leave and do it somewhere else, which would certainly get you a lower Gini coefficient along the lesson in being careful what you ask for. I think rising economic inequality is inevitable fate of countries that don't choose something worse. We had a 40-year stretch in the middle of 20th century that convinced some people otherwise. But as I explained in the refragmentation, that it was an anomaly, a unique combination of circumstances that compressed American society not just economically but culturally too. And while some of the growth in economic inequality we've seen since then has been due to bad behavior of various kinds, there has simultaneously been a huge increase in individuals' ability to create wealth. Startups are almost entirely a product of this period, and even within the startup world, there has been a qualitative change in the last 10 years. Technology has Technology has decreased the cost of starting startups so much that founders now have an upper hand over investors. Founders can Founders get less diluted, and it is now common for them to retain board control as well. Both further increase economic inequality, and the former because founders own the stock, and the latter because investors have learned founders tend to be better at running their companies than investors. While the surface manifestations change, the underlying forces are very, very old. The acceleration of productivity we see in Silicon Valley has been seen for thousands of years. If you look at the history of the stone tools, technology was already accelerating in the Mesolithic. The acceleration would have been so too slow to perceive in one's lifetime. Such is the nature of a leftmost part of a exponential curve. But it was the same curve. Do you not want to design your society in a way that's incompatible with this curve? The evolution of technology is not only not, is one of the most powerful forces in history. Louis Brandeis said, "We may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in hands of few, but we can't have both." That sounds plausible. But if I have to choose between ignoring him and ignoring a potential curve that has been operating over thousands of years, I'll bet on the curve. Ignoring any trend that has been operating for thousands of years is dangerous, but exponential growth especially tends to bite you. An accelerating variation in productivity is always going to produce some baseline growth in economic inequality. It would be a good idea to spend some time thinking about the future. Can you have a healthy society with a great variation in wealth? What would it look like? Notice how novel it feels to think about that. The public conversation so far has been exclusively about the ec- need to decrease economic inequality. We've been we have barely given a thought to how to live with it. I'm hopeful we'll be able to. Benedict was a product of a gilded age, and the things have changed since then. It's harder to hide in wrongdoing now, and to get rich now, you don't have to buy politicians the way railroad or oil magnates did. The great concentrations of wealth I see around me in Silicon Valley don't seem to be destroying democracy. There are a lot of things wrong in the US that have economic inequality as a symptom. We should fix these things. In the process, we may decrease economic inequality, but we can't start from the symptom and hope to fix the underlying causes. The most obvious is poverty. I'm sure most of those who want to decrease economic inequality want to do it mainly to help the poor, not to hurt the rich. Indeed, a good number are merely but being sloppy by speaking of decreasing economic inequality when what they mean is decreasing poverty. But this is a situation where it would be good to be precise about what we want. Poverty and economic inequality are not identical. When the city is turning off your water because you can't pay the bill, it doesn't make any difference what Larry Page's net worth is compared to yours. He might be only a few times richer than you, and it would be still just as much of a problem that your water was getting turned off. Closely related to poverty is a lack of social mobility. I've seen this myself. You don't have to grow up rich or even upper middle class to get rich as a startup founder. But few successful founders grew up desperately poor. But again, the problem here is not simply economic inequality. There is an enormous difference in wealth between the household Larry Page grew up and that of a successful startup founder. But that didn't prevent him from joining their ranks. It's not economic inequality per se that's blocking social mobility, but some specific combination of things that go wrong when kids grow up sufficiently poor. One of the most important principles in Silicon Valley is that you make what you measure. It means that if you pick some number to focus on, it will tend to improve. But that you have to choose the right number because only the one you choose will improve. Another that seems conceptually adjacent might not. For example, if you're a university president, you decide to focus on graduation rates, you'll improve graduation rates. But the graduation rates improvement not how much doesn't improve how much people students learn. Students could learn less if the improved graduation rates made classes easier. Economic inequality is sufficiently far from identical with the various problems that have it as a symptom. What will probably hit whichever of the two we aim at. We aim at economic inequality, we won't fix these problems. So I say let's aim at the problems. For example, let's attack poverty and if necessary damage wealth in the process. That's much more likely to work than attacking wealth in a hope that you will thereby fix poverty. And if there are people getting rich by tricking consumers or lobbying the government for anti-competitive regulations or tax loops, then let's stop them. Not because it's causing economic inequality, but because it is stealing. If you have if all you have is statistics, it seems like that's what you need to fix. But behind a board statistical measure like economic inequality, there are some things that are good and some that are bad. Some that are historical trends with immense momentum, and others that are random accidents. If we want to fix the world behind the statistics, we have to understand it and focus our efforts where they'll do most good.